So, what could it be like to have a mind that's completely free from greed, hatred, and ignorance? I'm very far away from experiencing such a state of mind, but there have been moments in my own practice where I've experienced a brief respite from some of these afflictions or a reduction in them in relation to a particular relationship or a situation. And those are moments that have given me a lot of confidence in the Dharma and also a lot of joy. So I thought to share a bit about them today. So first of all, in relation to anger. So I first started learning the Dharma to get over a breakup. And I used to feel kind of embarrassed mentioning that because, it seems like not a very noble or spiritual motivation. But, sometimes people have breakups and they turn to alcohol or drugs or they kill people. So reading a book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, going to meditation class, volunteering with a women's shelter was definitely the better option. Yeah, and I was very glad for that. So early on in my Dharma study, I learned that you could do the loving kindness meditation as an antidote to anger. And at the time, I was super angry with my ex-boyfriend. So he was the object of my metta meditation every day. And I felt very motivated to do the meditation because I had read in the book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama that, while you are angry and making yourself miserable, the person you are angry with is off on the beach, at a party, having fun. Yeah. And that was the case. He had met someone new fairly quickly and they had gotten married. And there I was feeling very sorry for myself, like no one will love me ever again. Yeah. So I thought, better do these meditations and get my mind in a good place. So about a year passed. And then one day, my ex-boyfriend called me up. And it turns out that his marriage was not going well. He was in the middle of filing for separation. It was not even a year. He was completely miserable. He said, I am on a poison drip. So there I was listening to him. And I think if I had not met the Dharma, it's very likely that I would have gone right back together with this person, right? The attachment was so strong. Or I might have really indulged in my anger, like, oh good, now you cry me a river. But instead, I could just listen to him. I felt sad, and I thought, there's nothing more I can do to help this person. It's just, I don't have that capacity. So I remember saying to him, well, meditation has really helped in my life. You might think about exploring that. And he got really upset. Like I was blowing him off or something, and he just hung up the phone. And after we hung up, I felt so relieved. I really felt at that time like, wow, I have been completely protected by the Dharma. That because of this long time meditation, 1 year, of just repeatedly doing the metta meditation, I wasn't hooked again. And I had been prevented from getting into this huge mess. So yeah, that gave me the beginnings of, this is a practice that really works. So, and then in relation to attachment, aside from, I was going to say, unfortunately, that was a temporary cessation from relationship drama, but not a permanent one. There were unfortunately still try again before getting to a different perspective. So aside from, attachment to romantic relationships, another big obstacle in my own journey toward exploring monastic life was my attachment to my parents. So in relation to that, when I first came here to the Abbey, that was something I was thinking very deeply about. And we were sitting the 1,000-arm Chenrezig retreat. So for most of that retreat, I meditated on the kindness of my parents, just really appreciating that, cried through a good portion of it, but really thinking about, what is the best way to repay their kindness? And one of the things I came to was the sense that first of all, I have to purify all the non-virtues I have created in relationship to these very important people in my life. But also the best way to repay their kindness is to cultivate my good qualities, to pay forward all the goodness they have given to me. Yeah, and not just for parents of this life, but also parents of past and in future lives. So that was something I came to by the end of that retreat and felt very strongly in my heart. And that was what also helped to, shift my mind toward pursuing monastic ordination. So I ordained, and about 6 or 7 months into my ordination, my parents came to visit the Abbey. It was the opening of Chenrezig Hall, and they stayed for a full week. So one day I was out in the forest working with my dad alone. And out of the blue, he starts telling me what a bad decision I've made with my life. Yeah, he starts to go on and on about how he's never going to have grandchildren, and did I know what his colleagues said? And for a moment standing there, I thought, this is kind of a done deal, like, what am I supposed to say? But I didn't get upset. I didn't feel any need to prove him wrong. In the past, we would get into arguments like, no, I've got to show you that what I believe is actually correct. I just listened to him. Of course, he's sad. He doesn't understand. He's not Buddhist. He doesn't understand what I'm doing with my life. So I just listened to him go on for a while. And it felt a bit like there were arrows coming out from him. Not out of malice, but he's just throwing all these hooks or arrows. And it felt like the arrows were just falling past me. They were not harming me, or I wasn't getting hooked. In that moment, I felt I had superpowers, like, oh, I'm avoiding these old arrows. Wow. So we just worked together. I didn't particularly respond in any way, and that was that. It did not shake my conviction in being ordained. And in that moment, I just, again, felt like, wow, that's the power of having practiced some Dharma practice. I did not have to repeat the same old attachment kind of relationship where I'm trying to prove myself to my dad, doing backflips to get his approval. But I could listen to his experience, I could have my own experience, and be confident in the decisions I've made on the basis of thinking clearly and knowing what's beneficial for the long term. So that was incredibly liberating. I think because, for most of my life, I've really struggled to, win my parents' approval. It was really the first time I was like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore. I can put my refuge somewhere else. And then the last instance I thought about was in relation to ignorance. And this one came about 2 years into my ordination. I was in the process of applying for the full ordination in Taiwan. And I was really very stressed out because the ordination application form was in Chinese, and you had to write a one-page autobiography in Chinese. And, English is my first language, Chinese the second, so there was that piece. But for some reason, I was just really overwhelmed by shame as well through that whole process, which I think comes from this is the whole identity of being overseas Chinese. You are just never Chinese enough. You have somehow failed by not speaking the language well. And if you go to a place like Taiwan or mainland China and you present like an overseas Chinese, people are going to spit on you. And most of my life, my dad has always said, you have drunk too much Western ink. And that's not a compliment. I'm like, it's true. So, there was all that, going on in my mind. I was just like, oh, I have to fill this form out. What am I going to do? And so Venerable Children happened to pass through my office, and then we talked a bit. And she, asked me what I was doing, and then she said to me, why don't you just fill out this form in English? And I looked at her like, are you crazy? Right? In my mind, I'm like, disgrace all the ancestors with the surname Pan going all the way back to the first man who walked this earth? Like, are you asking me to do that? I was like, well, after thinking about it for a while, I was like, no, that's true. I can fill this out in English. We had the English form for Venerable Jampa at the time, so I filled it out in English. And I went to the full ordination. And the first day at the full ordination, we were sitting in a row with all the candidates there. And the woman next to me looked at we all had our application forms in hand. The woman next to me saw my form, the nun, she grabbed my form and started reading it. I was like, what? And then she turned to the nun next to her and went, hey, she's a foreigner. And she said, we have to take care of her. So I thought, oh, all this attachment to a fabricated identity, thinking of everything I had made up in my mind, all this namtok, was completely pointless. And that's a moment I still think about a lot, because when my mind was so stuck in being a certain identity and everything it's supposed to mean, I couldn't see the situation any other way. The solution was really simple. And of course, Venerable Children, being wise, could see it from a different perspective. But at the time, it just seemed to me like inconceivable. And that's actually a very scary place to be, I think, when we're afflicted. Other options just don't seem available when the solution is really not so complicated. So that was another moment of like, oh wow, if there's wisdom in the mind, yeah, you don't have to torment yourself. All that suffering I went through was completely unnecessary. So, yeah, what could it be like to have a mind that's always free of attachment, anger, and ignorance? I really think it's going to be amazing. These brief moments would be so much, it would be extended, there would be so much clarity, there would be so many options that I would be free to choose instead of being stuck going down the same old rut of, relating to someone I'm attached to the same old way, someone I'm angry with the same old way, or hanging on to all these fabricated identities of this life, thinking there's no other way to be in the world. So this weekend we have a one-day retreat with Geshe-la coming up on working with afflictive minds. So may we continue to explore how to overcome these afflictions that have dogged us for countless great eons and begin to choose other ways of relating to others and of being in the world that are going to bring us so much more happiness and are really so much simpler than we make our lives out to be.